We have a really wonderful heritage. We have some great men and women to learn from.
I look back and I realize she's had a tremendous influence on me, much more than I realized.
I feel like I'm a lot like her because there's some traits that have come through the family. And I never felt like she ever left. I feel like she's part of my life now, and that's just a personal belief that she takes care of my personal needs, and that she's a bit of a guardian angel to me.
The boys all have builds like Grandpa Mac. Like, I was just looking at Dan today and I'm like, oh, he totally has that build. I have the curls. I got dumped with the curls and I love it. And so many of, seriously, I look at all the Williamson boys and I just think they're these carbon copies of Grandpa Mac, with Uncle Jim in there too, you know. But one thing, I look like my mother, and my mother looks like Grandma Mac. And so I've always liked that there's just a little similarity in there.
You know who has the personality of my father is my son Rob.
Rob.
He really does.
Yeah. I think that was one reason it wasn't so hard for me. Well, it was really hard for me to have a bald head, but it was easier because I had learned to love my father's bald head. It was endearing to me. I had the hardest time imagining him with hair. I can do that now. I can imagine him with hair now. But as a child, I never could imagine him with hair. He was just, I mean, that was the way that I could find my dad in a crowd. I could see the shiny head, because he was taller than most people, and there was the shiny head. It was just, it was his, and it was his signature. I loved my dad's bald head.
Getting this has made me realize, because so many of the loves they had were things that I love too.
Well, I often, when somebody, Clara will call me and say, what do I do for the baby, this and this and this problem, or somebody else in the family will ask for advice and I'll say, well, my mother always said. I do that a lot. I remember my mom once saying that there are 3 ways that you can teach children, and there are only those, no other ones. And the first one is example, and the second one is example, and the third one is example. and that was right. She always lived what she taught, and she felt like that we would learn from who she was.
There were certain habits that we learned that carried with us the rest of our lives.
Grandma never wasted anything. She never wasted anything. And to this day, if I ever throw anything out, I think of her. Grandma, throw this out. And there has been so many times I have pulled things out of the trash because I've had that thought. Grandma would not throw this out. She would use it for something else. And so I have.
John teases me all the time because I turn the toothpaste tube, or I cut the top off and get every last drop, or lotion, cut the top off and make sure I get all of it, every drop. Well, that's what she did. She was very careful.
I wash out my baggies, which is ridiculous, but we do it, and we reuse them.
She saved and found uses for almost everything. She was very ingenious and definitely instilled frugality in my mother, and that's something that she also passed on. So that's a lot of the beautiful handwork I've attempted, but don't come close to what she could do. But the frugality is something that stuck. So.
He taught me about the importance of listening empathetically to people, of reflective listening, where you would get people to talk. Rather than do the talking yourself, you would ask questions and then listen and reflect back to them what they were saying, and so that the advantage of that was they could tell that you really understood what they were saying because you could repeat it back to them, and so they knew that you got it. It was something I learned from my dad.
I'm really a people person, and I find that if I have 2 or 3 days without talking with people and things like that, my spirits start to drop, that I get my energy from people. Well, I think my dad was like that. But I also have a little bit of the shyness that my mother had. I mean, I don't think people who knew my mother would say that she was shy. But those of us who lived in the home with her, and you know, she would, that she was sometimes, and I feel that same way too.
The McAllisters were weepers, and the McGregors were weepers, and they got together, and we have double jeopardy. I remember Dad looking at letters that Marsley and Marianne would send from Grand Canyon or from college, and he would, you know, just, you know, a little tear would go down his eye. It was just so sweet. And Mother was very tender-hearted. Mother would cry over anything. I remember.
Well, one thing I'm grateful for my father for is he didn't ever raise his voice. And he just stayed calm, and I think I've learned how to do that most of the time. It's harder when you get older. But I'm very grateful for that example, because you tend to want to do what you've heard, what you've seen. It just kind of comes before you think. And so for me, the first thing that comes is be calm, because that's what my dad was. So I've tried to be like him in that way. I've tried to do some of the skills that Mother's done. I think in many ways I haven't been able to do nearly as well as she's done. I marvel at how much they accomplished as parents as well as within their own work. So I've developed some of the same skills Mother has, but she was a tireless worker, and I don't get tired. I just can't work like she did. So it's hard to know, having gotten Parkinson's. I'm not really sure. But I am influenced also by thinking by both parents.
I really can't separate. Sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, you're so happy, you're so cheerful, how come you are?" And I can't separate that from Mother and Dad and the way I was raised. I really wonder if I would have been, if I had been raised by somebody else. And they were always buoyant, always happy, always cheerful. And I will say I am so grateful for that, because as I met with things that were difficult in life, what I realized was all of that was a habit. When I was little, it was fun, and it was, I mean, we were happy, and it was the way to be. But when I got older and I wasn't so happy, I could be cheerful. And it was a direct result of Mother and Dad.
And I felt like, Jeannie and I talked about this sometimes, we felt like it was in our bones that we were born to be cheerful. It was kind of in our constitution, and I look at all my siblings and think that they're all that way. You are Helen Mar, and here's Marianne going through a lot of challenges now with health. She just takes it in stride, and that's how we were taught to do, to make the most of whatever we had. And I always thought that I could fix anything if I worked hard enough. It was a real surprise to find out once I was no longer on my own and responsible for myself and had other people in my family that I was responsible for, that you couldn't fix everything. You had to, you know, adjust with other people. But I just thought if you worked hard enough, you could fix any problem.
I never remember them complaining. I remember them working really hard. And I remember Mother fussing over the fact she couldn't get enough done. And that used to frustrate her, and that's a family trait. All of us want to be able to do more than we can do at every stage of our life. So that's a McAllister trait or McGregor trait.
I have caught myself so many times doing things that she did. She had meticulous files. And I remember thinking, Grandma, there's so many files. How do you keep track of them? I did not see the benefit in them. I am exactly like her. I have files everywhere in my house, and it makes so much sense. I can find something. It may be there's a lot of it, but if my husband will always say, "Where's this one thing?" "Oh, it's in my file." Because Grandma taught me, you file it away and you label it, and you'll be able to find it. And it's so true. Just little things like that have made my life better.
For many years, I couldn't understand why I needed to make my bed. I was just going to get back in it at the end of the day, and so if I left it unmade, it seemed like it would be efficient to do that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought there's a real psychological and emotional benefit to it. And I actually learned it when I was young. When you get up in the morning and you make your bed, at least that's one thing in your life that you've been able to order, And there's a certain immediate benefit that comes from it. I learned that, and I remember my mother saying this, a place for everything and everything in its place. I remember Mom teaching me that, and specifically forgetting where I had put things because I wasn't putting them in the same place every time, and being frustrated at the time, and the angst that was being expended to try to find the thing that I had misplaced. So some of those early childhood memories of order and duties and responsibilities and training have carried with me to this day and become part of who I am.
And I remember as a newly married person, I remember watching her. She used to get into her fridge and she would carefully organize all of the things in her fridge. And she would even label them sometimes. You know, this is the date. And sometimes she'd add, you know, well, let's put this little container. It only has a little bit of food in it. Let's add it to this other container. And so then we can throw this container away. And I remember thinking, as an ignorant, young married person, that's kind of a waste of time, Grandma. Why are you doing that? Of course, I never vocalized that. But I remember thinking, there's so many other things you could do than organize your fridge. It never failed. 8 years later, there I was organizing my fridge when I had, and I caught myself and I stopped and I was like, oh, you're doing exactly what Grandma did. And it makes total sense. She was right. And you don't have 5 million containers of sour cream with only an inch of sour cream on the bottom. You put them all together in one container and then you label it. It just made total sense.
I think maybe one of the main things that I see being passed on from Grandma and Grandpa is a love for learning. That was clearly part of what, well, Grandpa was a principal for so many years, and Grandmother worked in the libraries and the schools, but it was always part of our time with them. It was always so fun. It didn't feel like we were, learn, but they always made it seem just so wonderful to be able to discover more about the world that we live in, and that definitely was passed on to my mother and to each of us, and that's something that I try to pass on to my kids.
You know, for example, if ever we had a question, Mother would go right to the encyclopedias to find the answer. I'm the same way. We're sitting at the table, a word comes up, I go right to the dictionary and say, okay, here's what it is, you know.
She was always sending us, when I grew up and left home, she would send, oh, look at this fun article I found, or look at this interesting new fact I learned, or I do the same thing. And maybe my kids don't care, but I find myself saying, ooh, my kids ought to know this. And then the same way she would do.
Mother really taught us good English. We didn't always use good English, but Mother tried. And she would have us look up anything we didn't understand. It's been a blessing to all of us and to our children too. Most of my children will say, well, I really learned my English from home, which I guess we could say too. We learned it from Mother.
Both of my parents, we were immersed in beautiful literature, in beautiful music all the time. There was always music in our house, all the time. And in good thoughts and in positive learning habits and in books. Every room in the house had books. And we didn't know anything but to be immersed in learning things lovely. It was both a conscious goal and a byproduct of their lives, both, because it was a multi-generational thing. It was something that their parents had done, and their parents had done, and their parents had done. But it also was a conscious effort that they each individually were teachers in their souls, and they just shared who they were and what was important to them, and important in the gospel sense, and important in just learning and growing and being better people.